Hey, what's up you guys? My name is Tyler Rugge. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. For today's video, I'm going to be talking about bearded dragons and why they make absolutely terrible pets. I'm just kidding. They don't make terrible pets, but I want to talk about all the things that you need to know before you get a bearded dragon. The reason I feel compelled to make this video is because bearded dragons are very popular pets, and I very often see people not taking very good care of them, and of course, I don't totally fault the people who aren't properly taking care of their pets just because there is a lot of misinformation about animal care in general out there, and also it can be confusing finding the correct information. So hopefully I can help you with that. Basically just wanted to make a video of all the things that you need to know before getting a bearded dragon, things you need to consider, and maybe reasons you might want to reconsider getting a bearded dragon as a pet. I find that bearded dragons are often considered a beginner pet. Like if someone's like, what lizard should I get for a beginner? People often recommend bearded dragons, and I don't totally agree with that. They're just not the easiest reptiles to take care of. They're definitely not the most difficult, but they're also definitely not the easiest. There are a lot of different reptiles that are much easier than bearded dragons to keep. I actually have a video about the best reptiles for beginners, so if you guys want to check that video out, I will link it down below, along with a couple other helpful videos that I've made that I think you might find useful if you are considering getting a bearded dragon. I'm just going to start off by going into the different reasons why I think bearded dragons don't make the best pets for beginners, and why you might want to reconsider getting a bearded dragon as a pet. And with that being said, I'm not saying bearded dragons don't make good pets, and I'm also not saying that if you're not an experienced reptile keeper that you can't get a bearded dragon, because you still can. These are just things that you want to know before. One thing about bearded dragons that I would say is mostly a pro, but can also be somewhat seen as a con, and a reason a lot of people I think consider bearded dragons great for beginners, is because they are very hardy reptiles. And a reptile that's very hardy is something that is going to be good for a beginner, because if you have any errors in their care, you'll have time to correct those errors before anything detrimental happens. Now, the bad thing about this causes a lot of people to end up making a lot of errors in their care with bearded dragons and not noticing it right away, and then you don't really notice until your bearded dragon is really messed up. Unless you're very observant and you know what to look for, and you might see signs of, oh, like your bearded dragon might not be getting proper supplements or proper lighting, or maybe your bearded dragon might be impacted. You might be able to identify those things quicker if you're more experienced or you know what to look for. But if you're just a beginner and it's your first reptile, then you might not notice these things right away because of how hardy they are, and they don't really necessarily show right away that they're not doing well. But this is also a good thing, of course, because if you make any errors, you're not just going to kill your bearded dragon right away. There are a lot of different lizards that are very sensitive, and if you do anything wrong, they'll just die. And that's obviously not going to be good for a beginner. So a good thing is bearded dragons are very hardy. However, you do still need to be careful to give them the proper husbandry, so that if any health complications do arise, you want to make sure you're going to notice them right away and just make sure you know what to look for. One thing you'll want to know if you're getting a bearded dragon, or really any reptile or exotic animal in general, is there are a lot of different health issues that you could run into with a bearded dragon, in which case you will have to see a vet, and you're going to have to go to a vet that sees exotic animals. That's expensive. So make sure you have money put away for emergency situations where you might have to take your reptiles to the vet. That's just something you need to be prepared for before getting the animal, and having a reptile, any exotic animal, is very expensive in the vet department. So that's something that you want to be prepared for. Now, as far as their care goes, their care is actually somewhat complex. They are not very simple. There's a lot of really simple reptiles you can get. Bearded dragons, I just personally don't consider one of them, because they do have very specific care requirements, and it can be very confusing, especially for someone who might not have experience with keeping reptiles. And like I said, there's just a lot of other reptiles that are easier. If someone's like, what should I get? I don't know anything. I'm not gonna be like, the first thing you should get is a bearded dragon. But like I said, you can still do it if you do your research. I'm not trying to push anyone away. Bearded dragons make wonderful pets as long as you know what you're doing, so make sure you know what you're doing. One thing is bearded dragons are pretty big lizards. They're definitely not the biggest thing. It's not like you're getting a monitor lizard, but they are pretty big and they're pretty active, which means that they need a pretty large enclosure. And you'll find a lot of conflicting information about bearded dragon care, which is another reason why it can be kind of confusing. As far as updated husbandry standards and what most people are going for in bearded dragon care today, people usually recommend a bearded dragon being kept in an enclosure that's at least 4 feet long by 2 feet wide, which is a pretty large enclosure. So you want to make sure you have the space for an enclosure that size. You also want to make sure that you can afford to purchase an enclosure that size, because it can be costly. You can of course DIY your own enclosure if you are handy like that, and it would be much cheaper, but just know that they do need a pretty large enclosure. And then we have the actual different aspects to their husbandry that you need to pay attention to, such as their heating and their lighting requirements, which can be a little bit more complex than other reptiles because they are desert species. They need very high temperatures at their basking spot, and they also need very specific exposure to UVB. Having proper UVB exposure in their enclosure for them is extremely important so that they can properly synthesize and get vitamin D3, which can also be supplemented, but you need to have a light source in there as well so that they can synthesize their own as well. If you don't have proper UVB, it will cause your bearded dragon to have metabolic bone disease, just going to cause a lot of permanent issues down the line that you don't want to deal with. They need high temperatures to properly digest their food, so you're going to need a high output heat lamp. You're also going to need a proper UVB bulb. This gets confusing because there are so many different types of UVB bulbs. There's different brands, different sizes, different intensities, and people get confused about where to put it in the enclosure, how high, how far away from the actual ground should the bulb be. It does get very confusing. I will say I recommend a high output T5 bulb for a bearded dragon. That's just the best option in my opinion. There are other types of reptiles you can get, like snakes and geckos, where they don't necessarily require UVB, or people will recommend you do give them UVB, but if you're not giving them the right amount, they're not going to die or really suffer any major complications as a result. Whereas with bearded dragons, it is absolutely necessary that you make sure you have the proper bulb at the proper distance, and just you need to make sure everything's right. The next thing is their diet. Their diet is actually somewhat complex because they are omnivores. They eat insects, they eat greens, they can eat fruits. They need a variety in their diet. You have to make sure you're giving them the right ratio of greens to insects. You also want to make sure you're only giving them veggies that are safe for bearded dragons to consume and that are good for them. You can look up lists online of different greens that are good for bearded dragons. You also want to give them a variety. And what sucks about the fact that they need to eat insects is they need to eat live insects. You either have to go to the pet store every couple weeks and buy roaches or crickets, or a lot of bearded dragon owners have their own roach colony. Having your own roach colony is a lot more cost efficient because you don't have to keep buying more. They just reproduce on their own and you have an endless supply. If you don't want to have a roach colony, you do have to go to the pet store and get feeders all the time, which can add up and be quite expensive. Going along with that, you also need to make sure you are properly supplementing them with calcium and vitamins so that they are getting all of that good stuff in their diet that keeps their bones strong and once again prevents them from getting metabolic bone disease. Whereas if you're getting like a pet snake, you don't really have to worry about that too much because snakes get everything they need from the mice. But bearded dragons and a lot of other lizards, honestly, you have to be careful to properly supplement them. So those are the main reasons why I believe bearded dragon care is more complex than a lot of people make it out to be. Again, it's not rocket science by any means, but there are just a lot of specific requirements you have to meet in order to make sure you are giving your bearded dragon the best, most healthy and enriching life possible. And you have to do a lot of research and just make sure you have a good understanding of that. Whereas just there's a lot of things that are easier that you could get aside from a bearded dragon. This definitely wasn't everything you need to know, but if you want a whole care guide that lays out everything that you need for their care, then I did make a bearded dragon care guide video, which will be linked down below. It's a little bit lengthy, but I did go into very good detail about bearded dragon care. I know a lot of people found it helpful, so if you guys just want another resource to check out, make sure to check out that video. And then just a couple useful tips if you are still planning on getting a bearded dragon. I'm happy for you that you're willing to tackle this, and I'm sure you'll do a good job because you're obviously doing some research if you're watching this video, which is a good sign. But there's still some things that you might find helpful. One thing, do not cohab your bearded dragons. They're not social animals, it'll just stress them out. I've just seen people try to cohab them. I've even heard pet stores say that they should be cohabbed. It's not true, they're very much solitary. You can get multiple bearded dragons if you want, just you're gonna have to get multiple enclosures so they each have their own. The other thing is do not, please, do not get your bearded dragon from PetSmart or Petco or any of those chain pet stores. There's a lot of reasons why. A lot of the animals there aren't healthy. They don't source them from very great places, to say the least. So a lot of the animals they get in just aren't in great health. And they're just not the best place to get a bearded dragon. So if you want to get a bearded dragon that you know is well bred and has good health and is coming from a good place, then I would recommend going to a bearded dragon breeder. And then if you for some reason can't find a breeder or you don't have a local reptile expo, you might find a local reptile shop or a locally owned pet store. Those are sometimes a good option as well. Another thing is do not listen to the care guides at the pet stores. They are full of just false information. Yeah, it's wrong. So just don't listen to it, basically. Yeah, that's about it for today's video. If you guys found this video to be helpful, please make sure to give it a thumbs up. Subscribe to my channel if you guys are new here. Check out my social media links, which will be down in the description below. And I will see you guys in my next video.